Thanks to the Alan Wake files and various locations in the game, we get a glimpse of the strange history of the area and additional insight into some of the characters. I'm hoping to bring together what I know about Alan Wake and organize the information in a way that makes it a bit easier to understand. Today, I'll be going over the history and events that took place before Alan and Alice arrived to Bright Falls. And don't forget, if you enjoy this video, please like and subscribe for more and let me know your thoughts down in the comments. It's important to note that recorded claims and rumors of paranormal activity go back to the 1850s, before Washington was even a state. There were reports of things like Bigfoot sightings, strange lights in the sky, and a variety of people, animals, and objects appearing to be cloaked in shadows, as if they had a cloud of darkness surrounding them. One crucial part of Bright Falls history occurred in 1970. But first, let's talk about the famous poet no one knows about, Thomas Zane. Thomas Zane's background is a bit of a mystery. What little we do know is that he was an author and filmmaker in Europe, and in the late 60s he decided to move to the US to pursue his passion for poetry. He came to Bright Falls and stayed at the Bird Leg Cabin, named because the island itself was shaped like a bird's foot, located in the center of Cauldron Lake. The lake itself is a caldera, formed by a volcano that now lay dormant beneath the lake. During his time at the cabin, Thomas Zane would find great inspiration and would often dive into the depths of the lake in his diving suit, usually accompanied by his girlfriend and muse, Barbara Jagger. Zane loved diving so much that the island would later be named Diver's Isle. During his dives, he began to realize that Cauldron Lake holds many mysteries, and Zane was fascinated by them. But he wasn't the only one interested in the lake's mysteries. Dr. Emil Hartman was already living in Bright Falls at the time and had begun working as a writing assistant for Tom Zane. We'll go over more about Dr. Hartman later in the video, but both Hartman and Zane began experimenting with the powers of the lake and found that Zane's poems and writings could alter reality. They also learned that there was something else in the water. The dark presence was deep below the waters, through a threshold to another dimension called the Dark Place. They didn't know it at the time, but the claims of animals or people being covered in shadows were those who were taken by the Dark Presence. On July 10, 1970, Barbara Jagger, someone known for being a strong swimmer, drowned in the waters of Cauldron Lake. While overcome with grief, Hartman convinced Zane to use the powers of the lake to bring Barbara back to life. Zane wrote a poem to bring his beloved back to him, and was elated when it worked. But soon after, he realized that his resurrected love was actually the dark presence wearing her skin. Zane, realizing his love was truly gone, tied her down to a chair and cut out her heart, but he only found darkness, and still she lived. He understood that he had unleashed the dark presence into reality and believed that there was only one way he could fix his mistake. Zane began work on 2 poems, the first to erase himself and his works from reality, hopefully undoing what he had done when he tried to bring Barbara Jagger back to life and releasing the dark presence. But he would also add a failsafe. Anything placed inside of a shoebox, any shoebox, would be exempt from the reality-bending powers of the Dark Place. So he left his poems and some of his belongings inside of a shoebox in the cabin. The second poem he recited, and as he put on his diving suit one last time and held the body of Barbara Jagger close, he jumped into the dark waters of Cauldron Lake. As they continued to sink down into the depths of the lake, passing the threshold and entering the Dark Place, they were welcomed by many different entities, and both light and dark presences. And just like how Barbara Jagger was taken by the dark presence, Thomas Zane would sacrifice his physical body to the light presence. With their bodies claimed by their respective presences, they began to drift upwards, headed back to continue their eternal struggle. And while this was happening, the souls of Barbara Jagger and Thomas Zane descended deeper. Zane continued to recite the second poem, creating a small parallel world inside the dark place. A small sanctuary for their souls to live happily ever after. And as far as we know, they are still there today. Back towards the surface, the volcano had begun to erupt, swallowing the island and cabin whole, leaving them intact, but bringing them to the depths of the lake and into the dark place. The bodies of Barbara Jagger and Thomas Zane, now possessed by their dark or light presences, would continue their battle. And periodically, people would claim to have spoken or seen Thomas Zane, wearing his diving suit and visiting in dreams, or speaking through radio or television. Those who claimed to see Barbara Jagger would lead to the creation of an urban legend called the Scratching Hag. The hag was a witch with a fondness for darkness and a shroud of shadow that would make it difficult for people to make out her features. It was said she liked to eat children and lived in a house that would move from place to place. The bright presence in the form of Thomas Zane wearing his diver's suit would do all it could to keep the dark presence at bay. But in 1976, the threshold of the dark place would open once again. A heavy metal band called the Old Gods of Asgard owned a farm with a large farmhouse, outdoor concert area, and a distillery. The band would also experiment with the powers of the lake. Drinking moonshine made with the water of Cauldron Lake would give the band members visions. Some of their visions would even give them a glimpse of the future. In the 70s, the band was writing songs referencing events that would take place decades later. And on top of that, the songs written and performed by the band on the farm had a tendency to alter reality. And a great flood hit the area of Bright Falls and caused the threshold of the dark place to open. The band had to fight off the dark presence, and according to their recollection of the events, the dark presence was still wearing the skin of Barbara Jagger, and she summoned an army to protect herself. The band was unrelenting in their push against the dark presence, and finally victorious. However, the event took a heavy toll on the members of the band. Odin Anderson removed his right eye so that he might resemble his namesake, and his brother, Tor, was struck by lightning during the event. The Anderson brothers would become permanent residents of the Cauldron Lake Lodge under the care of Dr. Emil Hartman. Although the dark presence was not sealed back in its threshold under Cauldron Lake, it did go into a state of limbo. The dark presence would lie in wait, knowing that someone would eventually come and open the door once again. Dr. Emil Hartman began his career as a psychotherapist working in Vermont. He felt that the procedures that were being used at the time didn't actually help people recover and overcome their psychological challenges, and because of the medical standard procedure restrictions, he decided to move west. Dr. Hartman does not possess the creativity needed to use the powers of the lake, and without Thomas Zane and his poetry, he had no way to continue his research. Hartman needed a new creative partner, and his search for artists drove the creation of Cauldron Lake Lodge and his artist-focused practice. A while after the opening of Cauldron Lake Lodge, Dr. Hartman would also write a book called The Creator's Dilemma, where he would share his two trademark methods that he called engagement therapy and the flow, in order to help troubled artists overcome blocks in their creativity, which can occur when there is a form of internal conflict which causes an artist to lose their inspiration. Now, although the book is marketed as a self-help guide, the book is more of a long-form advertisement to encourage readers to become guests at the lodge if they really want the full benefit of Dr. Hartman's methods. He hoped to use the lodge as a laboratory where he could lure in troubled artists, then sedate and exploit them, using their creativity in hopes of harnessing the powers of Cauldron Lake or maybe even the dark presence for himself. Now, let's fast forward to about a week before Alan and Alice arrive to Bright Falls, with the live-action prequel released by Remedy. We are now introduced to a reporter named Jake Fisher, who appears to be avoiding his significant other, not even telling her that he was leaving on a work trip. And he's also self-medicating, possibly to cope with stress, and maybe hoping that this trip away will help clear his mind. Jake is headed to Bright Falls, where he'll be conducting an interview with Dr. Hartman to promote the release of his new book. Jake arrives in Bright Falls and stops at the Oh Dear Diner, where he is greeted by Rose Marigold, who quickly identifies herself as a big fan of Alan Wake and says she has a thing for writers. She brings Jake a large plate of food, and the diner begins to sing a rather unpleasant version of Happy Birthday while giving him a cake before he even has a chance to order. After his awkward meal, Jake heads to the Mountain Air Motel. On the drive there, he receives another phone call he chooses to ignore when a deer suddenly appears in front of his vehicle. Unable to stop or swerve, he hits the deer. When he steps out of his car and shines a flashlight on the deer, it cries out in pain. Jake's light goes out and he fumbles with it, and the deer disappears, running off into the woods. As he begins to drive away, he sees a rather ironic billboard advertising the 68th Deer Fest happening soon in town. Still shaken up, Jake makes it to the motel, where he has another odd encounter with the locals, this time with the motel's owner and his son. Jake finally lays down to gather himself in his motel room and settle down from the odd situations that happened that evening. He closes his eyes for just a moment, and then it's a new day, and almost time to meet Dr. Hartman for the interview. Jake stops by the Oh Dear Diner, greeted once again by Rose, who was watching an interview of Alan Wake on a laptop. A woman stands up from a booth and waves to Jake. This woman's name is Ellen. She moved to Bright Falls some number years prior. It's obvious that Ellen still has some feelings for Jake as she asks about Libby, the partner that Jake is trying to avoid. Jake confirms he is there for work, but couldn't figure out why Ellen moved to Bright Falls. After an awkward exchange, Ellen then states that she has to go because of her own deadlines. In the next scene, Jake begins setting up a camera in preparation for the interview with Dr. Hartman. After a brief exchange of pleasantries, Jake says that he'll be recording the interview and asks if that was all right. Dr. Hartman replies with, "You're a writer, right?" "So right." With the camera now gone, Dr. Hartman and Jake sit down for the interview, but Jake becomes mesmerized by a photo on the wall, and he sees strange images. Once he snaps out of his daze, we see Jake shaking hands with Dr. Hartman as the interview comes to a close. It's clear that Jake has no memory of what happened, but he has a legal pad full of notes and bizarre writings, even a drawing of a deer with massive antlers. Jake then drives through a tunnel and blacks out, waking up in a forest with what appears to be blood on his hands. As Jake looks around, he sees the boy from the motel office running away. In the next scene, Jake is driving to a radio station where he meets up with Ellen, and he tells her about the interview, showing her the notes and saying that he wasn't sure what happened, and that he woke up with red mud on his hands. Ellen says she thinks he should leave after he finishes his story, to help clear his mind. We then see the motel owner and his son, who hear something break around the motel. The owner checks what it is and sees light bulbs shattered. As he replaces the broken bulbs, he notices something in the woods, and he gets his rifle to go investigate. Something we don't see is stalking the motel owner, eventually catching him and dragging him away. After this, we see Jake at a general store attempting to get some parts to fix his vehicle. Finding out that it would take about a week before anything arrives, he simply purchases some duct tape and leaves. After some DIY repair on his vehicle, he then heads to the Oh Dear Diner, where he sees a woman trying to break one of the street lamps, and as an officer approaches her, she attacks and bites him. Jake tells Rose about what he saw, And then the officer comes inside in need of help with a bleeding bite, saying the woman is like a feral animal. Jake takes a seat in one of the booths, and we see a brief news segment talking about Alan Wake and one of his violent outbursts. And then a commercial about the upcoming Deer Fest begins, and Jake loses himself once again, becoming mesmerized by the images on screen. Jake wakes up, this time in a body bag. He sees a flashlight coming over the water and moving in his direction. He runs and hides, seeking safety in the trees. He goes on for some time, making it back to the road where he sees his car, oddly parked with the trunk open. He starts driving and goes back to the lodge to speak with Dr. Hartman. He tells Hartman that since he got there, he has been blacking out and waking in strange places, and that he believes he may have killed a deer with his car. Hartman says that he helps people with problems like his and encourages Jake to stay at the lodge. And as he uses a flashlight to check Jake's eyes, Jake flinches away in pain, questioning what it was and heading towards the door. Dr. Hartman calmly confirms that it's just the light. Jake rushes back to the motel and sets up his camera and uses duct tape to restrain himself to a refrigerator. When Jake wakes up, he finds his room destroyed, and as the recording plays, he realizes the cause. Having no memory of his actions and somehow freeing himself, and then having a violent outburst. Officer Mulligan, who we never meet in the game but is referenced in some manuscript pages, arrives and knocks on the door of Jake's motel room. Jake opens the door slowly, attempting to avoid displaying the turmoil behind him. Mulligan asks if Jake had been in contact with the motel owner, Sam, saying that he is missing and they found his son in the woods looking for him alone. The officer catches a glimpse of the chaos behind Jake and makes his way inside, looking at the mess and destruction. Jake says that since he is a city boy, he left the door open, not thinking, and a wild animal made its way in. The officer even agrees with him, pointing at portions of the damage, saying it looks like it was a 14-point stag, calling it a trophy deer. Once the officer leaves and feeling panicked, Jake begins to believe that he is losing control of his body and mind. He heads to the radio station and asks Ellen for help, needing a ride out of Bright Falls. On their way out of town, Jake begins to enter another daze, and then suddenly, Ellen, who was just in the driver's seat, is now gone, and Jake realizes that he is driving right back towards Bright Falls. He swerves, hitting his head on the steering wheel. Remaining in the car, hours pass. Jake disappears, and we never hear from Jake Fisher after that. As the series ends, we see Alan Wake and his wife, Alice, driving into Bright Falls from the same road, pulling off and asking what happened up ahead. The officer says that someone missed a turn and that they should be careful on the next stretch of road. There are a few theories regarding this miniseries, one being at the beginning with the deer, and that it was touched by the dark presence, and that is why it screamed in pain when the flashlight shined on it, similar to Jake's response during his encounter with Dr. Hartman and his flashlight. Another is that since Jake himself was a writer, the dark presence was trying to take him, and it either didn't work or the dark presence decided it no longer needed him, possibly learning that Alan Wake was approaching and discarded him. But just like in Alan Wake, we are left with a mystery and a series of unanswered questions. Let me know your thoughts, and I'll see you next time.